The sun was unforgiving that afternoon, hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows over the cracked, dusty roads of rural southern Texas. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, and cicadas screamed from somewhere deep in the trees. The only sound louder was the quiet hum of Jake's electric wheelchair as it rolled slowly along the worn trail by the woods. Jake Martin, 41, a retired U.S. Army sergeant, had learned to live with silence after the explosion in Afghanistan that stole the use of his legs and the loss of his wife just a year later. He had retreated to this wooden cabin at the edge of nowhere. Life was simple now. Books, late night radio, and the occasional call from his VA counselor. He didn't mind the isolation. In some strange way he preferred it. People pied him. He could do without that. But that day something broke the silence. It was faint at first, just a tremble of sound beneath the buzz of insects. A soft whimper, then a desperate, ragged bark. Jake stopped. He turned his head toward the woods, his brows knitting in confusion. There it was again, closer now, a choking, rasping cry for help. He pushed the joystick, guiding the wheelchair off the road, wheels bumping over dry weeds and uneven dirt. Branches scratched his arms as he maneuvered deeper into the thicket, heart pounding with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Then he saw a German shepherd, emaciated, filthy, and trembling, lay at the base of a thick oak tree. Its fur was matted with dirt and blood, and a heavy rusted chain wrapped cruelly around its neck, padlocked to a thick metal spike driven into the ground. Flies buzzed around a raw wound where the chain had rubbed the skin raw. The dog lifted its head weakly as Jake approached, eyes dull, but still holding the tiniest flicker of life. Jake's breath caught in his throat. "Who did this to you?" He looked around. No house nearby, no farm, no person. Whoever had chained this animal out here had done so to forget it. He reached forward, tried to lean, but the angle was all wrong. His fingers couldn't reach the chain. "Damn it," he muttered, frustration building. He reversed the chair, turned sharply, and sped back toward his house as fast as the wheels would allow. Minutes later he returned, with a dull hunting knife in one hand, and a thick wooden walking stick he kept in the closet just in case. His hands trembled, not from fear, but urgency. He positioned the chair as close as possible, gripped the stick with both arms, and used it to lower himself halfway out of the seat, straining to reach the chair. The dog didn't flinch. It simply watched him with quiet acceptance, like it had already made peace with death. "Not today, Jake," muttered through gritted teeth. He saw the blade through the chain link. Wasn't easy. Years of rust and cruel intent made sure of that. But inch by inch, the metal gave way. Finally, with a sharp snap, the link broke. The dog didn't run. Instead, it collapsed sideways, whimpering softly. Jake reached out and placed his hand gently on its head. "You're not dying out here. Not today." He stayed like that for a while, his hand resting on the dog's skull, the sun sliding lower behind them, casting golden light through the trees. Two souls, both abandoned in their own ways, had just found each other, and neither of them knew it yet. But this was the beginning of something that would change both of their lives forever. The journey back home from the woods was quiet. Jake had laid the weak German shepherd gently across a thick blanket in the back of his old truck and driven slowly along the dirt road, glancing in the rear-view mirror every few seconds. The dog barely moved. Only his eyes flickered open when the road dipped or the truck groaned over a rut. By the time they reached Jake's cabin, the sun was gone, leaving only a soft orange hue over the trees. He pulled up beside the ramp leading into the house and sat for a moment, staring into the fading sky before whispering, "We'll figure this out, you and me." Inside, he laid the dog now, cleaned as best he could, on a bed of towels near the fireplace. He didn't touch him, not yet. He knew that kind of trauma didn't disappear with a hot meal and kind words. The first night was rough. Every time Jake moved, the dog flinched. When the heater kicked on with a soft clunk, the dog growled low in his throat. He refused food, turned his face from the water bowl, and pressed himself against the wall like he wanted to vanish into it. Jake gave him space. The next morning, Jake rolled into the kitchen and prepared some warm broth with soft shredded chicken. He placed the bowl several feet away from the dog and didn't look at him. He just sat back in his wheelchair, sipped his coffee, and began talking slow, even quiet. "Name's Jake. Used to be a soldier, lost more than I care to count." The dog didn't move, but his ears twitched slightly. "You remind me of someone. Quiet, watching everything. Hurt but not broken." Jake did this every day, preparing meals, sitting nearby, speaking about his day, about nothing in particular. He turned the TV on low in the evenings, letting soft voices and music drift through the space. Ranger, as Jake had now started calling him, began to eat a few bites each day. By the end of the first week, Ranger was walking slowly, stiffly, but no longer trying to hide. One morning, Jake woke to find him curled next to the base of his wheel tail, flicking lightly at the sound of the wheels shifting. Jake smiled and leaned down to attach a small silver bell to the side of his left wheel. "Now you'll always know where I am," he said. Ranger seemed to understand. From that day on, he followed the soft jingling sound everywhere. And then came the night Jake would never forget. It started like any other. Jake had gone to bed early, the fire dimming low in the hearth. But sometime past midnight, a burning pain ripped through his lower spine, sharp, suffocating, blinding. His body tensed, then shook violently as the old nerve damage flared. Sweat poured from his forehead as he struggled to breathe, to move, to reach the emergency injection kit on the bedside table. His vision blurred. The pain wouldn't stop. Then, suddenly, Paws thundered down the hallway. Ranger burst into the room, barking, whining, circling the bed in panic. When Jake failed to move, Ranger jumped onto the bed, pressing his body against Jake's chest. He licked his face, pawed at his arms, and barked sharply again and again until Jake blinked, groaned, and managed to stretch his fingers toward the injector. It took everything Jake had, but he did it. Minutes later, the pain began to ebb. He lay still, gasping as Ranger slowly curled beside him, head resting just above his heart. They didn't sleep after that. Jake's hand found Rare's fur and stayed there. "Good boy," he whispered. "You stayed." From that moment on, they were no longer just man and dog. They were survivors together. Over the weeks that followed, Jake and Ranger became something more than companions. They became a team. Jake, once a military dog trainer before his injury, slowly began reintroducing the old techniques he thought he'd left behind, not with whistles or strict commands, but with quiet voice cues, subtle hand gestures, and steady repetition. Ranger remembered maybe not everything, but enough. He learned how to bring Jake's phone from the kitchen counter when he heard a certain whistle. He retrieved dropped gloves or remote controls with gentle jaws. When Jake said, "Check the door," Ranger would trot over and place his front paws on the window ledge by the entry, giving a low woof if someone was there. Jake even installed a large button panel near the door, and with some persistence and bacon treats, Ranger learned how to press it with his nose to trigger a door chime in emergencies. "He's a better roommate than I ever had in the army," Jake joked once, telling the story to his neighbor while sitting out on the porch. That porch had been empty for years. Now it saw life, visitors, conversations, laughter. Jake had started a blog, Pawas, and Purpose, detailing his journey with Ranger. Photos, short videos, and raw stories filled the page. He wrote about the day he found him, about the nights they couldn't sleep, and about the quiet healing neither of them had expected. People wrote back, veterans, animal lovers, teenagers struggling with depression, the bond between a paralyzed man and his once-abandoned dog struck a nerve. But it wasn't just inspiration. It was real. One late October night, the sky opened up, thunder cracked across the fields, and rain lashed against the windows. Jake had fallen asleep in his recliner, the fire in the hearth just embers. Ranger was curled up on the rug at his feet, his ears twitching with every rumble. Somewhere around 3 a.m., a sharp scent cut through the air. Faint at first, then stronger smoke. Rare's head shot up. He sniffed again, then bolted upright. A thin tendril of smoke was seeping from behind the bookcase where faulty wiring had sparked and caught onto the wooden wall paneling. Ranger barked, loud, frantic, piercing. Jake stirred, confused. Then Ranger jumped onto the recliner, pawing at Jake's chest, barking into his face, until Jake gasped awake. The hell? Smoke. Jake saw it now. He tried to wheel forward, but the air was thickening, the heat rising. "Ranger! Door!" he shouted, and Ranger moved. He lunged toward the wall, leapt onto the table, yanked the burning curtain down with his teeth, and dropped it to the floor. Flames licked the edge of the wood. He spun around, ran to the side exit, and slammed his weight into the crash bar Jake had installed just months ago for emergency use. The door flung open. Cool night air rushed in. Jake rolled himself out, coughing, eyes stinging as Ranger circled him like a soldier protecting his commander. They made it out. Minutes later, the fire department arrived. The back corner of the house was charred, but the fire had been contained. Had they stayed even a few minutes longer, it would have spread through the entire structure. Jake sat in his truck wrapped in a blanket, Ranger by his side, soaked, panting, but alive. "You saved me," Jake murmured, his voice raw. Again, Ranger rested his head on Jake's lap, and Jake, once convinced that his life had ended, the day he lost the use of his legs. Understood something deeper that night. Ranger didn't just need saving. He'd come back to save. And in doing so he gave Jake something more powerful than survival. He gave him purpose again. The story of Jake and Ranger had quietly gone viral. Veterans across the country had reached out through Jake's blog, thanking him for sharing his story. Said Ranger reminded them of the dogs they'd served with. Others simply said it gave them hope. One afternoon, Jake received an email from a national organization that trained service dogs, specifically for veterans. Their message was kind and respectful. We read about Ranger. His instincts, intelligence, and resilience are incredible. With the right training, he could help change the lives of many other wounded veterans. Not just one. They offered full medical care, advanced service training, and the chance for Ranger to live at a top-tier K-9 center with open fields, handlers, and endless resources. Jake sat with the email for days. He knew what they were offering was good. In fact, it was incredible. Ranger would help others the way he'd helped him. It was a chance to give back on a massive scale. Jake called them, talked it through. They told him the next transport truck would pass through his area in a week. He said, yes. The night before Ranger was to leave, Jake sat out on the porch with him. The stars were sharp in the Texas sky, the kind of night that demanded silence. Ranger lay beside him, chin on his paws, eyes blinking slowly. Jake reached down, rubbing behind his ears. You're going to be a hero for someone else now, buddy, he whispered. Just like you were for me. He didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, the van pulled into the driveway, a sleek, white vehicle with the organization's logo on the side. A man in uniform stepped out, clipboard in hand, a friendly smile on his face. Jake nodded, his stomach tight. He rolled to the back door, called softly, Ranger, let's go. Ranger stepped out slowly. He sniffed the air, tail still. The handler knelt, extended a hand with a treat, and patted the back of the open van. Come on, boy. You're going to love it. Ranger didn't move. Jake tried again. It's okay, pal. Go on. Ranger looked at the van, then looked at Jake, and then slowly, deliberately, he turned around, walked to Jake's wheelchair, and circled once before sitting down, resting his head on Jake's knee. The handler blinked. Wow. He's really bonded to you, huh? Jake laughed, but there were tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. He scratched behind RER's ear and nodded. I guess you've made your choice. Huh? Ranger thumped his tail once. Jake looked up at the man. I appreciate everything you're offering, but I think he's already where he needs to be. The man didn't argue. He simply smiled, gave Ranger one last look, and said, He's a good dog, one of the best I've ever seen. As the van rolled out of the driveway, Jake and Ranger sat together in the shade of the porch. The breeze stirred the wind chimes. Somewhere in the fields beyond, birds called out. The world felt right, because sometimes the best place for a hero isn't where they can serve the most. It's where they're loved the deepest. And for Ranger, that place was here, with a man who had pulled him from a chain in the woods and shown him what home truly meant. The story of Jake and Ranger didn't stop on the porch. Not long after Ranger chose to stay a local journalist visited their small town. She'd read Jake's blog, seen the footage from the fire incident that neighbors had recorded, and asked if she could tell their story. Jake was hesitant at first. He wasn't used to the spotlight, but Ranger had already saved lives. Maybe his story could do the same. The segment aired on local television one weekend. Images of a grizzled veteran in a wheelchair beside a scarred German shepherd, video of Ranger gently helping Jake retrieve fallen items, the haunting photo of a burned curtain in Jake's living room, and the quiet quote that stuck with everyone. He was thrown away. So was I. But together we remembered how to matter. The piece was picked up nationally. Letters poured in, emails, care packages, donations. But the most powerful messages came from other veterans, men and women who had felt forgotten, broken, invisible. They thanked Jake for showing them that healing was possible even from the darkest places. One email read, "I haven't left my apartment in 5 months, but tomorrow I'm going to the shelter. Maybe there's a ranger waiting for me." 2. Jake sat on the porch reading those letters, his hand resting on Ranger's broad back, and one morning he had an idea. With the help of some neighbors, a few local vets, and donations from complete strangers, Jake began transforming the back portion of his land into something new, a safe space, a haven. They built modest kennels, shaded by trees, cleared trails for walks, and set up a small community center. They called it Second Chances Ranch. Their mission was simple: to care for dogs left behind by deployed soldiers, elderly veterans, or those too sick to care for their pets. No red tape, no long forms, just dignity, love, and a soft place to land for both the humans and the dogs. Ranger, now gray, muzzled and a little slower, remained at Jake's side through every step. He lay by Jake's wheelchair during volunteer meetings, sat in on orientation sessions, and greeted every new rescue with a soft tail wag and gentle eye. He had become a symbol not just of survival but of what comes after. One warm afternoon, Jake wheeled himself out to the porch with a steaming cup of coffee and a leather-bound notebook in his lap. The breeze rustled the wind chimes as Ranger settled beside him, head resting near Jake's foot, breathing steady. Jake flipped through the pages. His memoir in progress. There were stories of war, loss, and then the turning point, a cry in the woods, a chain, a knife, a choice. He looked up as a commotion caught his ear. From across the yard, a young pup, no more than a few months old, came bounding through the grass, clumsy and full of joy. One of the latest rescues. The pup skidded to a halt beside Ranger and sniffed his muzzle. Ranger opened one. Then slowly his tail gave a single Jake chuckled softly. "Ranger," he murmured, closing his notebook. "Looks like it's your turn to teach now." The sun dipped lower, casting gold across the fields, and in that quiet, sacred space where second chances weren't rare, but routine, one old soldier and his dog sat in peace, not because their battles had never happened, but because they'd face them together and come out the other side stronger. Some wounds can't be healed by medicine, but they can be healed by a look, a bark, or the quiet weight of a loyal head resting on your foot. Jake had given up on the world. Ranger had been left to die alone. But one act of compassion, one choice to Care was all it took to light up the part of their lives they thought had gone dark forever. Together they proved that no soul is too broken and no heart too lost to find its way home again. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to be part of more real-life miracles, stories of second chances, of healing, and of the unbreakable bond between people and their animals. Subscribe to Amazing Paw Stories and join us as we continue to share powerful journeys of love, loyalty, and hope, because sometimes the right paw finds you when you need it most.